Welcome to the Blessors of Israel podcast. I'm Matthew Dodd, Executive Director of Blessors of Israel. Honored to be in studio today with Pastor Rich Jones, the founder and chairman of Blessors of Israel. Well, Pastor Rich, we want to pick up where we left off last time.
Right.
Last time we were talking about Trump's plan to turn the Gaza Strip into the Riviera of the Middle East. And since that time, he's doubling down.
Changing it some.
And changing it some. You know, there's been word before. We were talking about him saying people could voluntarily leave. But now it appears that no, they will go and they might not be permitted to return, that the United States will take it over, clear it out, and then rebuild it. And so there's been, as to be expected, much opposition on all fronts with regards to this plan. And so I think it'd be good for us to continue to talk about that development as he doubles down.
Right.
And then also look at some responses from, surprisingly, some countries that we would think might not be so open to the idea.
I agree. You know, but I think what might be good is maybe there are some joining us who really aren't familiar with what this idea is. What does it consist of? So President Trump basically came out with an idea to resolve the conflict, the issue, the future of Gaza, which is that area, of course, that has been the center of conflict for many, many years, right? The Palestinian Arabs living in that area have been determined to destroy Israel. And there have been repeated attacks against Israel, October 7th being the most egregious and just disastrous for Israel. And the result has been now the near destruction of Gaza. I mean, the environment is not healthy. The buildings are collapsed. The homelessness is rampant. It's just a mess.
And then on top of that, you still have, there's 400 miles of tunnels. You have munitions that have not been exploded. So you're talking about a very, very dangerous environment.
So President Trump, which I think we should give him credit for certainly trying to address a problem that has been unresolvable and getting creative. I mean, we've never heard a solution like this one before.
No, he's definitely shifted what's been called the Overton window. You're hearing this all the time in the media. And the
Explain that.
The Overton window is basically you have this window of ideas that are acceptable or popular. But if you go a little bit to the north or a little bit to the south, then it becomes unacceptable or even radical. And Trump is the master of moving the Overton window. And so that's what I think you see happening here is a shifting of the narrative, a controlling of the idea to have people begin to think of something that's unacceptable as potentially acceptable.
Okay, so when you say moving the Overton...
Shifting that Overton window.
It means saying something that's so far out of that Overton window and yet bringing light to it, bringing attention to it, that everybody starts thinking about it like they were never thinking about it before. And there's a shift, I can't say globally, but maybe globally even, in regard to this whole issue of what to do about Gaza after this war.
I mean, the things that we can agree with that Trump said is, number one, what they've tried in the past doesn't work.
Clearly.
Number two, something needs to change because it's not healthy for those who are there to still live there while we try to rebuild or that area is rebuilt. It's very unhealthy, it's unsafe, and then you also have the existential threat to Israel.
Well, that's
something
right.
needs to be done with Hamas. They cannot be allowed or permitted to rule over that region and threaten the existence of Israel ever again.
And that, of course, was one of the goals of Israel at the beginning of this, response to October 7th, this war, was we must eliminate Gaza. Hamas. They can no longer rule over Hamas. That was one of their key main goals, objectives for this war. And so now, interestingly, though, this negotiated ceasefire includes, right, the deal that was agreed to, and that both Hamas, Israel, and the United States really drove toward, was that Israel would withdraw, and that Hamas would essentially be there in leading. Now,
Exactly right.
what has happened in the past?
Which there's grave concern. In fact, there's been a lot of criticism
Sure.
against the United States and Netanyahu for agreeing to that.
And we talked about that in an earlier podcast, saying, I'm not sure that was the best deal, because it's just going to get us right back to where we started. And again, what we've seen is this cycle where, Hamas will attack Israel. Israel will respond with overwhelming force and a lot of destruction and, unfortunately, loss of life. And then at the end of that ceasefire agreement, billions and billions of dollars come in from all over the world to rebuild Gaza. And then they rebuild it, they restore their tunnels, and then they rearm themselves with new missiles, and they get right to the exact point they want to, and they do it all over again. And here we go again. Israel comes back with overwhelming force, destroys Gaza again, not to the degree like they've done this time, but it's over and over and over. And so the point that President Trump is saying is, we've got to stop this cycle.
Yeah.
Are we going to just keep pouring in billions and billions and billions?
Clearly what we're doing is not working here. There needs to be another idea.
Because we know what they're going to do with the money.
Exactly right.
They could have.
They'll do the same thing that they always have done. They could have built, after in 2005, when Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip, they could have turned, with all that money, with all those resources, they could have turned it into the Riviera of the Middle East. They could have done so. They opted instead to turn it into a war zone.
That's right.
So that they could attack Israel.
So now back to your original point, which is now that idea has come out, and his idea again is and I want to use the words carefully because I don't recall the exact words. Is it remove the Palestinians living in Gaza, clear it, I mean, level it.
That's right. Clear it of all the unspent munitions, everything.
All the tunnels,
everything.
Rebuild it into what could very well be the Riviera of the Mediterranean. But then, what I heard originally was that we'll rebuild it. I mean, we'll remove the Palestinians temporarily, and then we'll rebuild it, and then they'll come back, which I'm not sure the point of. But now, of course, it's been amended to say, no, they really should not come back. Okay, so now you have this conundrum of, is it just an offer? Or, does he come to the Palestinians there and say, if you would like, anyone who wants to leave? Or now do we force it? And that brings up a whole nother dynamic question, of course. But it's interesting how, and you mentioned that as the shifting of the Overton window, that people are like scratching their heads. I don't know. Let's think about this. What would that look like? And so now, I think to everyone's surprise, even an Arab nation has stepped up and said, what might this look like?
The UAE, the ambassador to the U.S., Youssef Al-Otaibi, was asked if the UAE was working on an alternative to Trump's plan to relocate the Gazan population. He said, not yet. I'm quote, I do not see an alternative to what's being proposed. I really don't. So if someone has one, we're happy to discuss it. We're happy to explore it, but it hasn't surfaced yet. And many are interpreting what he's saying as this plan is inevitable. At some point, it's going to happen. Very fascinating to see the dynamic. And by the way, Russia, the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, he didn't rule out the plan. He said it's worth waiting for some details. Here, if we're talking about a coherent plan of action, we don't know the details, so we have to be patient. But I just find it very interesting that in the midst of all this aggressive rejection, here you have these two key players who are saying, hey, let's be honest, we don't have another plan. Let's find out what the details of the plan are. Perhaps there's not anything better.
Well, of course, right now, there really isn't anything better. It doesn't mean just because there's nothing better does not mean that's the best one.
Now, what it's doing is it's bringing countries to the table that
Right.
have been complacent. And that was really another
Exactly.
one of Trump's gripes. It's like, you guys have been working on this for years. Nothing's clearly working.
Right.
And shot across the bow, throw out this idea,
Right.
swing for the fence. And now suddenly the Egyptians call an emergency meeting. They're going to be meeting on February 27th. You've got Saudi Arabia, other actors that are going to be there along with the UAE to talk about this plan, which looks like it involves keeping the Palestinians there, shifting them into these makeshift huts while things are being cleared out and infrastructure is built up so that they can have more of what they used to have before October 7th.
Right. You're talking about the Egypt plan. But that's, in my view, as I look at that, I don't really see that as an implementation of President Trump's plan.
No, it's not. It's supposed to counter it.
It's a counter to it.
It's a counter to it.
But when you really look at that plan, what it is let's help them rebuild, and let's just do it the way we've been doing it for the last.
And let's keep them there because we don't want them spilling over to our border.
Well, now that's
that's
a whole nother.
always been the case. We don't want them in Jordan. I mean, the Jordanian president, he met with Trump this week, and Trump did the full court press on him, and he said, no, we can't. Let's look at what the Egyptians have to say when they have their meeting. Let's look at their plan. But we will take on 2,000 children who have cancer or have a grave illness. We'll take that on. And Trump said, well, that's very magnanimous of you, but nevertheless, that doesn't deal with the deeper issue.
Because ultimately, the issue of the Palestinian refugees is and has been a conundrum, an unsolvable problem since 1947-48, when the War of Independence took place and 5 Arab nations attacked Israel, intent on destroying them. We ended up with, at that time, about 700,000 Palestinian refugees, let's say in what is known commonly as the West Bank. We would call it Judea, Samaria, Gaza, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. Those 700,000 have now grown to 2-point-some million, although there's 2.4 a million or 2.2 or something in Gaza. My point being is, never in the history of the world has there been an ongoing refugee problem for this long a period of time. No one is stepping up to resolve this. In other words, Jordan could have absorbed these Palestinian refugees. Syria could have. Lebanon could have. Egypt could have. But they're all still there. Why? It's because it fits a narrative.
Exactly right. And I found this quote today that I want you to hear this. This is so transparent. It's a confession of sorts.
All right.
And it goes back to 1977. A senior PLO official, Zuhair Moshin, said, and I quote, "The Palestinian people do not exist. The creation of a Palestinian state is only a means for continuing our struggle against the state of Israel for our Arab unity. In reality, there is no difference between the Jordanians, the Palestinians, Syrians, and Lebanese. Only for political and tactical reasons do we speak today about the existence of a Palestinian people, since Arab national interests demand that we posit the existence of a distinct Palestinian people to oppose Zionism." Now that, my friends, is a walk through the neighborhood of honesty right there.
And he was a leader under Arafat.
He was.
At the time. That was an amazingly honest moment. But of course, he wasn't speaking to the World Council, you might say. He was speaking. It was to
actually it was to in Europe. He was in Europe. It's in a European newspaper. He was being interviewed.
Okay, well, that's a pretty.
Isn't that amazing?
He's being interviewed. Okay, that's again. He's not. But nevertheless, it's an honest statement, right? And the point that I often bring up is, hey, if the Arab nations of the world really wanted to make a Palestinian state, they had so many opportunities.
They did.
I mean, you could go back and count the number of times that they had the opportunity and every single time rejected it.
You know, it's interesting. Alan Dershowitz wrote an article recently for the Gatestone Institute, and he noted that Israel agreed to a Palestinian statehood in 1937 and 38.
That's right.
47 to 48.
That's right. War of
67, 2000, 2001,
That's right.
and 2007. In each case,
Right.
he says, it was the Palestinian leadership that refused to agree to the two-state solution that would have created a Palestinian state.
That's right.
And then he adds this: the current anti-Israel protesters in the West are not calling for a Palestinian state living in peace alongside Israel.
That's right.
They, like the failed Palestinian leadership, just wants to end Israel's existence.
There it is.
Nail on the head right there.
Exactly. That is the issue. In 1947-48, when the United Nations took up this issue, their solution was to partition the area, then known entirely as Palestine, into partitions, some for Jews, to be called whatever they wish. They chose Israel, and some for the Arabs. And that partition plan gave the majority of that area to the Arabs. Israel accepted it, even though it was a far, far less of a solution than what they wanted. They accepted it because at least it's a state. The Arabs absolutely rejected it. What if they would have accepted it?
Exactly
We wouldn't
right.
be having this discussion.
Not at all.
Right? But they rejected it because their agenda, you could say, is to destroy Israel. Now, if you could talk to the vast majority of Palestinians in Gaza or the so-called West Bank or any of the refugee camps and say, what do you think is the solution? Like, is a two-state solution the answer? Almost predominantly, you're going to hear them say, no, it's not a two-state solution. It's a one-state solution, and it's a one state of Palestinian Arabs, and Israel's not in it.
And you know, it's interesting that when they say that, it's not offensive.
Exactly.
But when the
Right.
Israelis said it, how dare you?
Yeah. Well, Israel has never said that. Israel has never said.
You do have some that have within the government that obviously posit that idea, but my point though is there's clearly a double standard. I mean, going back to the UN Security Resolution 242, they want to go back. That was saying go back to the 1967
maybe refresh.
Six-Day War borders, which would actually give the Arab Muslims more territory, and also East Jerusalem. Well, if you were to put that into effect, like these countries want, then you'd be displacing, 480,000 Jews.
Right.
So somehow it's okay to displace the Jews, but it's not okay to relocate the Palestinians so that you can rebuild that territory, and we'll see what comes of it in terms of how many can return to the area. But nevertheless, you also remove that existential threat to Israel.
I agree, but now, you hear this phrase a lot. Israel is occupier, right?
All the time. Settlers, occupiers.
What does that mean? Well, again, if you say, well, they're occupying some of the settlements on the West Bank, is that what it means? Not really. You talk to Palestinian Arabs in those areas that I mentioned, and they will say, no, they are occupying our land, all of it. So how much then should Israel have? You say, how much should Israel have? None of it.
None of it. Exactly
Not
right.
1 foot of it.
And exactly right.
That's genocide.
And that was the cause for the catalyst for October 7th.
And all of those.
And everything else.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And so what now? So now this is important because that's ingrained into their heart. You might say this is what is is preached all over in mosques all over.
Indoctrinated into the souls of the kids.
Exactly. And so all of these are being raised up. As all of those militants, let's call them, that were defeated, eliminated in Gaza, were all replaced. A new generation came up and replaced them, right? Because it's ingrained in the children to hate Israel and to take up this mantra of defeat. We're not going to stop until Israel is defeated. So you talk about President Trump's plan And again, we mentioned this before, one of the factors it does not factor in is jihad. It does not factor in. You can't just take these people who have lived all their lives for the purpose of defeating Israel and then put them in Indonesia somewhere. Now, if they want to, that's a whole other story. And we should offer anyone who wants. I think that's the right thing to do. Hey, we have an opportunity for you to make a new, fresh start.
Yeah.
Anybody want to do it? I think many would do it.
As long as they don't have a gun to their head, because you don't
There's the
know
problem.
how many actually want to go but aren't allowed to go. Because again, going back to that quote I read a moment ago,
Right.
there's an agenda here. You know what's also interesting, and I found this just the other day, after the Gulf War in 1991, Kuwait punished the Palestinians who had collaborated with Iraq's Saddam Hussein by expelling some 280,000 of them in a mass purge that was later joined by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and other Gulf allies, which resulted in an estimated 400,000 Palestinians being expelled.
I don't know that you could find any war in history where there haven't been some refugees. In fact, case in point, let's go back to the 1947-48 War of Independence when all these 5 Arab nations attacked Israel. I'm sure that our listeners will remember that the vast majority, if not all of the Arab states, expelled the Jews out of Iraq, etc. And by the hundreds of thousands, hundreds and hundreds of thousands who were displaced, forcibly displaced, lost all their land, lost all of their monies, all their valuables, and displaced with whatever they could carry. And now they're living in refugee camps in Israel.
Yeah,
And then what did Israel do? Absorbed them right in.
that's right.
Trained them up, give them jobs, give them opportunities, a fresh start. Now they're living abundantly in Israel. But my point is, there's always been refugees. Why now, after all these years, do we still have these refugees?
I couldn't agree more. And let me continue the thought.
Yeah.
Kuwait also shelled Palestinian neighborhoods. This is Daniel Greedfield's article, also in the Gatestone Institute. Great resource. They shelled Palestinian neighborhoods and sent death squads to massacre them. Tanks and troops were deployed, checkpoints were set up, and most of the Palestinians were driven from Kuwait and their neighborhoods were eliminated. One Palestinian neighborhood was bulldozed and turned into an amusement park. And then one day, President George H.W. Bush, who supported all of this, told reporters at a press conference on July 1st, 1991, quote, "I think we're expecting a little much if we're asking the people in Kuwait to take kindly to those that had spied on their countrymen that were left there. They had brutalized families there and things of that nature."
Yeah.
That also captures it.
Exactly.
What happened to Israel on October 7th?
So back to
And again, I'm not condoning this, but I want to call out the double standard, the hypocrisy of it all.
And we can see that it's really rooted in anti-Semitism. We can go to the UN, we can go to the World Criminal Court, we can go on and see this in so many places. But I want to go back to the original question, which is there another plan? There really is not. Right now, we don't see another plan. Now, we're not saying that's the best, but we don't see any other one right now. But what it does, and I think you brought it up very well when you said it changes the Overton window, is it gets the world thinking in ways that they have not thought before, and maybe, perhaps, something can come out of that that's different. But we're going to monitor it, we're going to watch it, that's what we do.
That's right.
And really bring in, hey, this is part of a bigger picture scripturally. We didn't have time today to talk about Russia.
Oh, can we just real quick?
We're going to need
just
a whole new one
okay.
on that one. Go ahead.
Okay, but just real quick, I think it's important that the Guardian reports that Sudan and Russia are moving forward with a plan to build a Russian naval base on the Red Sea.
Okay.
And by the way, keep in mind
Yeah.
that just back in December, it was reported that Iran is also looking to work with Sudan to develop a military base there. Why is that important, Pastor Rich?
You control that area. You control the world's flow of oil. You control the military advantage.
Right through the Red Sea.
Right through the Red Sea.
South right into Israel.
I mean, it's a critical control point And if that goes through, Russia will have a foothold that will make them very dangerous in that area. But that's part of what we are seeing as we are following the nations and how it aligns with Scripture.
Exactly right.
And so
Ezekiel 38 and 39, you're going to have Israel being attacked from the north, east, and south.
From the south. And so I would like to do another podcast on Russia and their recent developments. And of course, we're now hearing talk of a negotiation with Ukraine. So we needed to know.
Yeah. Well, we'll wrap things up for today. So grateful that you've been able to join us. We pray that you find our dialogue, this content, helpful so that you know how to pray for Israel, stand with Israel in the latter days. I'd like to encourage you to visit our website at www.blessors.org. That's Blessors with an ORS.org. We want you to understand our vision and mission as a new organization. We believe God has called Blessors of Israel for such a time as this, and we want your partnership as we continue to inform the community, the Christian world, about the importance of standing with Israel in the latter days. I'd like to invite you to visit our newsroom. There you'll see curated news. Many of the things that we're talking about right here, right there. News from other sources that involve Israel and the Middle East. You'll also see original articles with biblical perspective as well. I'd like to encourage you to make sure that you like this podcast and subscribe to this channel as well, whatever channel you're watching right now. Follow us on Facebook, X, and Getter. And we also covet your prayers and appreciate your financial support as we build this new important ministry. Remember, those who bless Israel will be blessed. Shalom, shalom.